Hi, I'm Julie Kearns,
And I'm Aaron Dylan Kearns.
and this is Talk Cinephilia To Me. Today we are posting part one of a two-part conversation with Romeo Carey, son of actor-director Timothy Carey.
Timothy Carey was an independent director known for his films The World's Greatest Sinner, Tweets Ladies of Pasadena, and The Insect Trainer, which unfortunately didn't make it to production before his passing in 1994.
As an actor, he contributed his talents to Kubrick's The Killing and Paths of Glory, as well as John Cassavetes' Minnie and Moskowitz and The Killing of a Chinese Bookie, amongst many other films. And now, on to the conversation.
Yeah, hello.
Hello, is this Romeo Carey?
This is Romeo Carey.
Hey, how are you doing?
Not bad. Nothing good should come easy. So you have to work for this.
Yeah, we did. I'm Julie,
And I'm Aaron.
Julie, did you say Julie?
Yes,
Oh, that's good. Like Romeo and Juliet.
Oh,
like
yeah.
See that? Julie. All right.
So, shall we talk about World's Greatest Sinner?
Oh, yeah. I guess
Yeah.
that's what this is about. Right.
So, just a couple of things first to start things off. How we'll introduce you in the podcast. Like, how would you want us to introduce you for this?
Oh, it could just be the son of Timothy Carey. That's fine.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you want us to also put in professional ed or filmmaker stuff like that?
Yeah, you could say independent filmmaker.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm also I'm an educator too.
Yeah.
I teach at Santa Monica College in Beverly Hills High School.
Mm-hmm.
I run a TV station there.
Mm-hmm.
Spectrum. It goes to like 100,000 homes. I've been doing that for about 15
That's a
years now.
lot.
Oh yeah.
I'm also working on a documentary. I've
Uh-huh.
got like 6 documentaries that I'm working on.
Oh,
One day
really?
they'll
That's a
all be-
lot.
Mhm.
I'm sitting at an editing table right now, but
Okay.
I'm working on one with it's called Where the Music Was.
And what's
and
that
it's-
about?
That's music of the 60s.
Okay.
It's hosted by Mark Lindsay,
Mm-hmm.
All right.
and we've got just all these guys from the 60s. We've done about 10 interviews. It's
Okay.
on my IMDb if you look at IMDb and look at things in production.
Yeah.
Okay.
But,
I had looked at that,
also-
but I missed that. Okay.
Yeah, it might be in the pro version. You may not be, but if you look at things in development,
Okay, I'm not in
Not-
the pro version. All right.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, the pro version has like kind of all the good stuff.
And you said you were working on 6 films in total?
Oh, me, yeah.
Yeah, uh-huh.
I've got 6 documentaries.
Mm-hmm.
One's on my dad.
Mm-hmm.
One is on another character actor called not a character. He's really a talk show host, but he's also a character actor.
Mm-hmm.
His name is Skippy Lowe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Skippy Lowe, one of the most prolific like public access interviewers alive.
Mm-hmm.
He's dead. He's dead now.
What did he work out of? What area?
His stuff played all over, but
Okay.
he was he worked out of Los Angeles
Okay.
primarily.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Skippy Lowe. All right, where the action was. Here it is. So there's it's a 12-part series,
Mm-hmm.
and Johnny Eccles, that was from Love.
Mm-hmm.
Bill Henchy, Mark Lindsay, Allison Martino, that's Al Martino's daughter, Ann Moses, the editor of Tiger Beat,
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Larry Tamblyn of the Sandells,
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
and then we have 2 more interviews lined up. Ringo Starr, and there's another guy. I'm not sure who the other guy is, but I'm one of the producers. There's 3 producers. I do all the camera work.
Okay.
I do the production end of it. But yeah. So it's called Where the Action Was. Used to have a TV series called Where the Action Is. Mark Lindsay back in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah.
The TV show.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, Mark Lindsay was like the host. It was done by what's his name? The big Dick Clark.
Right. Uh-huh.
Yeah. But and one of the documentaries is on the making of Sinner.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've shown different versions of that all over the planet. I was just my last trip was in Tasmania.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yep.
wow.
Showed it in Tasmania. Yep.
That's funny. That's pretty global.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A global
Um,
interest.
yeah. Mostly Europe. It's made it most. I've made lot of trips to Europe.
Mm-hmm.
To Munich, to the Munich Film Festival.
Mm-hmm.
That's what started it, like 1996, I think it was
Okay.
95.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, Martin Scorsese chose it as one of the greatest rock and roll films ever made.
Yeah, we heard about that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So it went from there. I was on a circuit after that.
Mm-hmm.
Once you get into those catalogs, and it became the centerpiece of the Biennale too, the film festival in Vienna. It was
Okay.
a major part of a film festival a number of years ago,
All right.
where they showed Sinner, and then they showed the Tweets.
Oh, they showed that
Yeah,
as well? Okay.
Yeah.
yeah, it was like a religious experience. It was
Uh-huh.
really pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But so now we can run through your questions. What were the questions that you had?
Okay, so the first one that we were meaning to ask is just sort of cutting right into the meat of it. What were some of the personal motives that your father had while making the world's greatest sinner, like social, political, and philosophical?
What was his his goals in making it?
Yeah.
I don't think I don't his thing in the documentary is his answer to that was he was just tired of what he was watching on
Mm-hmm.
coming out of Hollywood, and that what what he didn't like was they'd always advertise that the movie was unlike any other movie. It was going to be the most controversial movie you ever saw, and they would tout it as this revolutionary kind of whatever movie that came out, and you'd see it and it would look like all the movies. It just had it was like a Campbell's soup line with a different label.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so he said, I'm going to do that, but I'm going to be honest, and I'm going to do real controversy, because I mean that must be what they're trying to sell, but nobody's like hitting the mark. So I'm going to be honest about what I think is controversial,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to just ride the rails on that, and I'm going to tell them it's revolutionary, and I'm going to tell them the same stuff, but mine's going to be the genuine article.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if
That was his inspiration.
it's still controversial now, I can imagine what it was like for the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you imagine? Hard to believe to put it into there's people that couldn't sleep at night.
Seriously.
Oh.
Oh yeah.
I'm trying to think back. Watched so many movies from that era, and I cannot think of anything
From that time, that was like
even
what Sinner did.
even vaguely experimental that is like it.
Yeah.
It is so different.
Because Sinner is a really experimental film and how it's put together. Like the content, the structure, it's all very different.
Well, what you have to recognize that one, my dad wasn't a filmmaker. My dad never graduated
Mm-hmm.
10th grade, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
His education was using his dead brother's birth certificate and joining the Marines at 15 when they had him as 20 or 22 or something like that.
Okay.
I think his brother was 7 or 8 years older than him.
All right.
And so he had to grow up fast, but he ended up getting run out of the military, but they gave him an honorable discharge.
Uh-huh.
And when they did, he wanted to be a singer, but they told him he was tone deaf and you can try drama.
Oh no. Okay.
Oh.
So he tried drama, and he liked it.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of singing did he want to do?
What was that?
What kind of singing did he want to do?
He just wanted to be a singer.
Okay.
He just thought a singer. Look, that's who he is
Yeah.
in The World's Greatest Sinner.
Oh, I
So he
know.
thought,
Yeah. And I've seen the photos of him at the 5-4, where it looks like he's holding on to the mic. It looks like he's singing there.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, nobody could tell him he couldn't do something.
Uh huh.
Mm-hmm.
But so that's so he used the idea is if you have no formal education in filmmaking,
Mm-hmm.
and of course he learned a lot because he was on a lot of sets and he was taking note, and he was an actor, so he knew how to do that part of it. He just had to get the right kind of help together.
Mm-hmm.
But most everything is made in a barrel.
Well, what's I was thinking is that he was on in so many great films, and but his cinematic values are so different that
Well,
I was
that's what
thinking,
I that that's what I'm explaining. What I'm
yeah,
explaining is
but I was
what I'm
thinking also that was
explaining.
partly intentional.
No, I'm
No.
going to tell you, it's
Mm-hmm.
not intentional.
Okay.
Okay.
No,
All right.
it's not intentional. It
All right.
can't be. Those things are. You can't discover that kind of movie making on your first effort.
Yeah.
And
Uh-huh.
the point of the matter is, all cinema, with the exception of rare cinema,
Mm-hmm.
call it experimental, call it what you want, but this wasn't experimental film. This was a movie.
Yeah.
His
Mm-hmm.
intention was, I'm making a Hollywood movie.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
But all Hollywood movies are made in a barrel.
Mm-hmm.
But
All Hollywood movies are made in a barrel. That means they're confined to a particular form.
mm-hmm.
He had no barrel, and he was going about making the same thing they were making. There was no barrel because he didn't see the barrel. There were no walls to
Mm-hmm.
what he was doing.
Okay.
I'm just going to go do it. And so when you end up doing things because you have to do it, there's no restraints on anything. So you can see as far as you want to see, and there's no limit to what you cross a line. Do all these, these conventional things have no convention.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can call the World's Greatest Center a documentary, but even documentaries, they conform to, because everybody's learned. Picasso said took his whole life to get back to just drawing like he was a child,
Mm-hmm.
and he said I should have done that my whole life because that's all I should have been. Instead of being a cubist and conforming to what art taught me,
Mm-hmm.
the true nature of art is to leave your own fingerprint.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you do that? Well, first of all, you got to be free, and you got to be like a child. Once you've been run through the mill of how, or you've been schooled on exactly how to do stuff, and you're walked through the parameters of what you have to stay within, then you become that commodity.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't have any of that.
Mm-hmm.
He had young guys who never worked in film before, and he would take a guy, if he knew how to use a camera, you're my guy.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd be like, holy shit, he trusts me to go make a movie for him? Yeah, I don't know what I'm doing. This guy, the one guy, Ray Dennis Steckler only shot stuff for the military, and he didn't do a lot of that either. And when he showed up to do the movie, he was like, I couldn't believe your dad trusted me to do it. I'm 20 years old, and he's letting me shoot a movie.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
So they're just going about. One of your questions was, what did Kubrick make of the film? And he did show Kubrick the stuff.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
Of course they were friends. They spent months in Germany together.
Right.
They worked in 2 movies. I just interviewed James Harris, who's one of the producers, and he was telling me, man, your dad was just, that's all we talk about. He says, that's all Stanley would talk about is your dad. All the jokes, everything was all about your dad.
Oh, really?
He was so hooked on your dad. So was I. He says, because he's the most entertaining, funniest guy on the planet. So it was we couldn't wait to put him, after the killing, to put him in center.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, we wanted him there early with us too. So we brought him early. And he said, your dad, after about a month, he came to me and he said, I want to go home. He goes, what do you mean you want to go home? We haven't even started filming yet. And he said, yeah, it's not what I thought it was. He says, what did you think it was? And he says, well, there's not, nothing to do here. It's I want to be with my people.
Uh-huh.
With your people. He goes, who are your people? And he said, blacks. And he said, blacks? There's no blacks in Germany. And he goes, you got to stay because your contract is we haven't even started filming yet. And so my dad used to hang out 5-4 ballroom. He'd go have these crazy parties, and all his buddies were all these heavy hitters, these the black musicians, and all his buddies were it was fun.
And there wasn't that scene at all over in Germany.
He wouldn't find that anywhere in Germany.
Uh-huh.
But
Mm-hmm.
it's funny because here's a guy in his 90s. telling me like it was yesterday. And it's, James Harris stuck in his head, like so crystal clear. And of course, my dad met my mother doing Paths of Glory,
Yeah, I had read that. Yeah.
and Stanley Kubrick met his wife
Mm-hmm.
on the same set. She was the only girl in the film. She sings at the end,
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
but so he says he showed him some of the world's greatest sinner, and Ray Dennis Steckler, the camera guy, was there with him too at the screening. I was just looking at dailies. He wanted to know what you think. It was the big scene with he's running for president and there's a mob outside.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And he said he just looked at the whole thing. The only comment he said he made was that when they shot the crowd scene, there should have been a reverse of it. It should have been a shot with like Clarence, the main character, in the shot with the crowd so you can see the crowd.
Mm-hmm.
He said, but instead you shot the crowd, you shot him, you had this big crowd, but you didn't put him in the crowd, so it's like over the shoulder, get some angle so that you can see him in the shot.
Right. Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But this is like the real deal. Here you had this big mob, you had the opportunity to get that shot and you didn't get it because it was like a slug shot. He says, why didn't you get it? And Ray Dennis Steckler was telling you the story, and he says, and then he says, your dad says, hey, why didn't you get the whatever shot? And he says, well, I don't know, I was ignorant, I didn't know what I was doing, I was just shooting whatever he told me to do, I was going to shoot.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like it just goes back to what I was saying earlier, that they didn't know what they were doing, they were just doing it. But but they were friends. I mean, my uncle tells me a story about, because my dad they had to send him home from Germany because he was kind of jealous of all the celebrities there. Everybody from Adolphe Menjou, big French actor who was in the film. There's, of course, Kirk Douglas.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
There's a bunch of stars in the film. They were only interested in those celebrities when there was stories being written. So my dad decided that he's gonna stage his own kidnapping. And that's what he did. He staged his own kidnapping, and then he was the headlines.
Yeah.
And then they had to show up, and he had to say it was real, but it really wasn't. And they had dragged this whole river and this lake, and there's this whole expedition of rescues looking for him. And the city of Munich was going to charge the production company for the cost of the looking for him.
How long did that go on?
I don't know, probably a couple of weeks. Yeah, it was not good. And then, they sent him home to get him out of trouble. Mm-hmm. But that also cost the film because there were all these other scenes that weren't shot. They were supposed to develop each one of those soldiers that they end up killing. They had like this whole little backstory that ended up not happening.
Oh, backstories for each one of them?
No, it was a backstory to each character, so you had some compassion.
Mm-hmm.
There was more to their character, that they were really worried that when they got back, they didn't have enough material.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But it ended up being enough. It ended up working because of what they had was enough to sell it.
Yeah, it was. It was a great film. You get plenty enough there, actually.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
But yeah,
and it's compact that way too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm sure it helped move it along.
Uh-huh.
But the other story was, so my dad was I'm not sure what happened beyond that, because my dad was hired again by Kubrick for One-Eyed Jacks.
Mm-hmm.
And One-Eyed Jacks ended up falling out of Kubrick's hands, and ended up being Brando who directed it. But so my dad was already cast in it. So that would have been the third film that my dad would have been cast in. And so they were still buddies even after what happened in Germany. But then something happened. I'm not sure what happened, but my uncle explains to me. And my uncle, by the way, is in the world's greatest sinner. He's one of the followers, and he got his degree from NYU. He's a film, had a master's degree in film.
Okay.
His brother couldn't get out of the 10th grade, but his younger brother got a master's degree at NYU. And he came out to go work on the film. After the film, he he said, I don't want to have anything to do with filmmaking. Filmmaking is not what I want to do.
Uh-huh.
So he got into advertising. But he says while because he was out work helping my dad for like a year, he said that he gets a call from the set of Spartacus, and it's Stanley Kubrick.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
That means Stanley Kubrick wants him in Spartacus. I'm like, oh shit! And here my uncle's like pretty excited because he knows all about Stanley Kubrick, and he's like, "It's okay. Let me go get my brother." And he goes out and he says, and "We have pretty big property. We have like a horse, and there's." So he walks into where the corral is. That backyard and that shot in center was the backyard, and one of the
Okay.
buildings was the studio
Mm-hmm.
where they actually shot all this stuff. I still have that. I still work in there. That's one of my I shoot stuff there still. I edit there.
Mm-hmm.
But uh, he said he went out and he told him Kubrick's on the phone on the set of Spartacus. He was combing his horse. He's combing his horse's hair, and he says okay. And he can see as he walked back to one of the main houses, he could see my dad was still combing the horse's hair. And so we made small talk with Kubrick until my dad just never showed up. And then Kubrick said, "Well, have him call me because I've got something for him." And he never called him.
He just wasn't interested in Spartacus.
Guess not.
No. While we're on that
Could
track,
could you could you imagine him in Spartacus though?
no, but
Holy crap!
well, I don't know. I can't imagine Kubrick doing One-Eyed Jacks.
Yeah, I
Actually,
know.
yeah, I can't imagine. I just can't fathom that.
Yeah, it would have been interesting.
Uh huh. Did you ever have any stories of like the audition for the killing? How did he get into the killing?
Killing was
Mm-hmm.
the killing. Yeah, he told me. I got an interview from James Harris, who
Mm-hmm.
was the producer of it, and he said that they already knew who he was when they sent him over. It's like there's no doubt that guy's going to be in the film because they had seen him in Andre Dutau's had a couple different titles. One was called Dark in the City, but it was Andre Dutot, who was like I think he was Hungarian. He did those film noir movies. Those that feature. It was I think, but they knew who he was, and they were like, "That's the guy," because they already liked him
Mm-hmm.
from stuff that he had done, and he said it was pretty simple that they didn't that once they saw him they signed him.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
This was really their first real feature film.
Right.
They were both from New York. They could relate to each other, and Kubrick recognized that what my dad was doing was kind of operating on his own, in his own like independent way. And the nice thing about Kubrick was he could recognize talent, and he wasn't afraid to let that talent just unhinge because he
Mm-hmm.
knew he could reel him in and have him do it his way too. But it's like get him to do it both. Get the best out of whoever the actor was, and he did that his whole life, with different actors. So that was one of the things that allowed Kubrick to be Kubrick. You couldn't get that kind of performance out of an actor like Jack Nicholson,
Mm-hmm.
in The Shining or in 2001. Yeah, the performance you got from what's his name, from Kidman. I
Nicole
mean
Kidman.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean those were all things that allowed actors to really have free reign.
Mm-hmm.
And Kubrick was notorious for a guy who wrote who actually really kept a really tight ship. Certain actors had free reign.
How much reign did your father have in the killing, such as in the scene with his when he's in the parking lot? The character of Nicky is a lot different in the movie than it is in the book, considerably different, and what happens is very different. You don't have the racial aspect, and in the book, he's not killed. Nicky's not killed.
Yeah, well, no, because they let my dad basically loose in that scene.
Mm-hmm.
They let him ad lib.
Okay.
They let him ad lib that performance,
Mm-hmm.
and there aren't two scenes that are the same.
The horseshoe performance.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
no doubt. But that's kind of how he did a lot of those. A lot of that stuff. I mean, even if you watch him, and my dad didn't really matter who he was working for. He would write his own dialogue. They would cross stuff out.
Mm-hmm.
They would go really pretty crazy when he did TV stuff because those things are really written to a script.
Mm-hmm.
Make all kinds of stuff up. They were like, that's not even in the script. But it's like, because I got to watch him. I'd go to the set lots of times with him, and we'd discover, where people would just, I mean, the script supervisors, directors, they would just find it like so bizarre that they'd hire somebody and they wouldn't read their lines. But that's the beauty of having a contract. Once you hired that commodity,
Mm-hmm.
you're stuck with them.
Did he have the same kind of freedom in The Killing of a Chinese Bookie?
Oh, of course.
Okay, yeah, uh-huh. I know that he did. I had read that he did in Minnie and Moskowitz. That was
Yeah.
pretty much all ad lib.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Well, my dad would memorize the
Uh-huh.
script. He could pick up a script and memorize all the material in
Mm-hmm.
it, but he would just as well cross it all out and put his own dialogue in.
Mm-hmm.
And then that dialogue would get him into the scene with it could still go off the rails of what he wrote.
Mm-hmm.
But directors always want to get back to, it depends who the director is. They always want to get back to what's in the script. But a lot of them just said, no, this is too good. I'm just let them go. As long as the scene happened and you got through the scene and the other actors didn't throw the other actors off, it works. It's part of. If you really see, his objective wasn't that he wanted to throw people off. Everybody knew where the scene was going, even if he made stuff. But his objective was to be just living in a space that's, on the border of chaos and order,
Mm-hmm.
and holding it all together and just making it hyper real.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't do that if you're just reading lines.
Speaking of scripts, how long did it take for him to develop his own script for World's Greatest Sinner?
Oh, The World's Greatest Sinner had a couple iterations. It's
Mm-hmm.
funny because James Harris told me about it. First question he asked me was, "Do you know about Christ My Enemy?" I said,
Okay.
"Yeah, I've heard of it."
I have not heard of it.
Yeah, well, that was The World's Greatest Sinner's first title.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Christ My Enemy. And I said, yeah, I remember it. Because I found a script, and the script had that as the title, Christ My Enemy. But it was only a partial script.
Uh-huh.
I never had a whole script until I interviewed the woman who played his wife.
Mm-hmm.
And she still had, after working in The World's Greatest Sinner, that was her last acting performance. Then she became a school teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And she never let go of the script. She handed me the script.
That's great.
50 years ago. Yeah, it was amazing. And, the script and the actual movie don't jive that much. It's there, but it's a different script.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the script for World's Greatest Sinner. Christ My Enemy. You said you had seen a partial script for that?
No, I saw that title was one of the original titles on it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, he also had a title called Frenzy. He would go through titles. It was Christ My Enemy, then it was Frenzy, and then it became the World's Greatest Sinner.
So he just instead ended up with Frenzy Productions?
Yeah.
Yeah, yep.
Okay.
That was it.
I was wondering, once you mentioned how he would ad-lib, I was wondering if he did the same sort of ad-libbing treatment with his own screenplay for Sinner.
Yeah, no, when he wrote a script, he was trying to write just like an outline so everybody can, blueprint, so they can at least know cohesively how to move the story along.
Mm-hmm.
But once you get on the set, you're still going to move the story along, but you don't have to stay within the confines of the script.
Mm-hmm.
The script sometimes is a lot. It just doesn't serve the purpose in the moment when it's happening. It just serves to give you get you down the gate and into where you're supposed to go.
Mm-hmm.
But he would normally have other actors do their line. Most of the actors that were in Sinner weren't really professional actors.
Do you know if the ending was always there for the sinner, or if it was something that he came up with later? The stabbing of the Eucharist.
Yeah, I think that was always there.
Mm-hmm.
He said he wanted to do another ending. The ending was supposed to be when he explains it in one of his last interviews in the documentary.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think, was it when he told me, or was it actually it's in the documentary though. He says, I wanted it to be, you open a door and there's this just blinding light. You can't really see what it is. You can't see anything yet, but you hear this whip, and this whip, you see this black little dot like a ball at the end of a rope. And as the light clears up and this whip is going back and forth, you see out of this ball of light this lion kind of blowing in this atomic inferno, and it's this lion with a crown, and he falls to the ground. Is that's because that was supposed to be God.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, it was kind of that was supposed to be the ending that he wanted.
That's interesting that it's an atomic inferno that he was thinking of.
Yeah, the energy was coming off the lion.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's just this radiant beaming.
Yeah.
This alien being that was
Okay.
inside the room,
Uh-huh.
but it was supposed to be a symbol of God.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, he says "my Lord and my God" there at the end, doesn't he? So
Yeah,
that's kind of like it's a doubting Thomas.
But was really nah. What it was, wasn't a doubting Thomas.
All right.
It was the opposite.
Okay.
It was confirmation that you are.
Yeah, exactly. Because the whole thing with doubting Thomas.
I get it.
Right.
Doubting Thomas, that he didn't believe him.
Right.
Now he did.
Now
exactly.
he did. Exactly. Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's pretty much what that was.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a very powerful scene, is stabbing the Eucharist there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's probably the most sacrilegious thing, that if you're going to talk about controversial.
Oh, for the time especially.
Oh,
I can't imagine for the time. I grew up I wasn't raised Catholic until I was 5. So I had my first communion and all that, and then I was Catholic from around the age of 5 until around the age of 10. And that threw me back to I can imagine from my first communion and how I would have felt about that then. Yeah.
Martin Scorsese saw it once, and he's walked into a screening room and he saw part of it. The part that he saw was when he was stabbing the host, and
Mm-hmm.
couldn't leave, and he watched it until the blood was chasing him. He says, it just stuck with me all day long. He stuck with him because he ended up using ideas in Last Temptation of Christ.
Oh yes.
He was inspired by the scene from Sinner in that.
Also, the men following the
His followers chasing after him.
rivulet of blood. Back to the house. That too. There's something very powerful about all these men stumbling up through the yard. Timothy Carey going up through the hallway into the room.
Oh yeah.
But,
He was trying to make a scene out of it. That's actually that scene was production wise. There was a lot of production value in it. They were using cranes, and it was shot really well. It was a high production value scene. The other scene, which goes by really fast, Ray Dennis Steckler, the cameraman, said that the hall scene where he goes back into the building and he has to get to the door. He said that the hall was really narrow. It was the house that they were doing is this mansion. There wasn't a lot of room, and the gear back then was so big and heavy. They were using this French camera, an Eclair or something, and he said that your dad wanted it all to be. They wanted the whole thing to be dollied in. And the dolly means you got to bring all this dolly gear in and get it in the stairwell.
Through that hall. Wow.
He says, I didn't want to do it. It's because we were working all day long, and it was 20-hour days. And I said, no, we'll just bring that up there. And we had this argument. And he said, this is the only time I really fought with your dad. It was why I didn't want to do the work. And your dad told me Stanley Kubrick gets what he wants Timothy Carey gets what I want. I don't care how long it takes to get that Dali shot. That's what we're gonna get. And he says we ended up doing all the work and make sure we got all the gear, and he says, man, after I saw the scene, all that work is all worth it. And it's like, ever since then, whenever I made a movie, he says, I always thought of that scene and how if Timothy Carey can get it, then I can get it.
It's a beautiful
Yeah.
scene. I keep returning to the scene of him stabbing the Eucharist too. Before that, how difficult that would be. I mean, just the energy that he puts into. You've got that small piece of bread there, and it's really extraordinary how he was able to do that
and communicate on camera so well.
Well, the truth of the world's greatest sinner, it's 80 minutes of just one actor performing. That's all it is. All the other stuff is like window dressing. Yeah, it's like a magician forcing you into just staying with me until I get through this whole thing. He had enough weirdness or intensity and just his ability, Svengala, to just hijack you if you were in for the ride. Because a lot of people look at that and go, I'm out. I'm not going to, no. I'm not in for this ride. But because it's so incredulous, really, lots of it. But most of it is just, I would meet these producers and actors and invariably anybody who knew my dad would say, you can't take your eyes off of him. You couldn't he'd steal anything. Whatever he had, all eyes would be on him.
Well, it's a great ride. It's a fascinating film.
Definitely,
it really is. Just, I mean, there's a completely unexpected thing after the other.
Oh, yeah.
With him tying everything together.
Yeah,
the glue that holds absolutely everything together.
I mean, if you ever saw the complete version of Tweet Twig, what it is every scene has to live and die on its own.
Okay, it sounds like it was a very episodic thing, yes, from what I was reading about it.
But no, that's like anything.
Yeah.
It didn't really matter what. I mean, that's the idea for any film in general. I mean, if you're really a filmmaker, but the whole film is only as good as each scene. So each one of his scenes had to be a performance. It had to be complete. It had to be a whole movie unto itself. So I mean, that's like what he was after. So all those scenes, but he's in almost all of them. He's got to make every one of them work. And the ones that he isn't, his energy's getting a performance out of whoever is in it.
I was going to ask about the 5-4 Ballroom. Did he ever see James Brown perform there? I was thinking of James Brown's performance in Please.
He was friends with.
Okay.
Yeah, he was friends with all those guys. Chubby Checkers. He was friends with all the guys that were at those places. He used to hang out at that scene. There's scenes in The World's Greatest Sinner that is the 5-4 Ballroom.
Right.
Those are all his friends. And he had a movie that he was going to work on called Al, and he had actually shot a couple days of it.
Okay.
And I don't know if Al.
What is it? Was it something?
Oh, it's called L.A. spelled backwards. I found some of the stuff that he shot and I transferred it. It's really pretty amazing. It's early downtown L.A. when they still had the train system and the trolley cars and. It was really pretty amazing, but he said he shot for a couple days and the actor that he picked just didn't. He was hoping that he could turn him into an actor, and he ended up laying an egg.
Okay.
So he scrapped it. But it's supposed to be someone from the Midwest who wants to have their baby in LA. It's 9 months pregnant and they get lost on the freeway. It all takes place in 24 hours, like The Bicycle Thief. Cassavetes tried to get it produced through Universal, and they liked the script. They just didn't want my dad as the director.
What year was that?
It was in the 50s.
When did your dad meet Cassavetes?
I'm not sure how they met, but they became friends. I think at a screening or something. They were like kindred spirits because they were doing the same stuff. Cassavetes was a lot more successful because his content was universal. My dad's content was strictly Americana. It's difficult to make sense of that kind of movie if you're not from here. Love stories are so universal that you can put subtitles on and it's done. You put subtitles on The World's Greatest Sinner, it just becomes more confusing. It's difficult to relate to it. So it was very difficult to sell it. for different reasons. They always, because it's got like political ideologies, it's got religion and sex, and just little. He would have been fine with just one of them, but he mixed a cocktail that's
Oh yeah, the politics and the religious and the yeah,
yeah.
uh-huh.
It,
And the
nobody,
rock and roll, the
yeah, distributors don't know what to do with it. They
celebrity,
never did.
yeah.
Yeah, so he could never get distribution. It's just one of those things.
Mm.
Yeah, and then he tried to get it into theaters, but they wouldn't. They're like, no way, we're not gonna let that the theater. So they boycotted the theaters. He couldn't get a deal, so he ended up trying to just distribute it in independent theaters. It was tough because you had to spend all this money on advertising, and you have to four wall one theater at a time or a couple. You just couldn't get the traction.
Aaron had read that he periodically worked on the film.
Yeah, I did. I heard that he did multiple cuts of the film, and some of them went into the 1990s. And I was wondering what some of the differences may have been between the release versions and like some of those later cuts from like the 1990s or 1980s and stuff like that.
Yeah, he was like always dropping in, taking scenes out, putting scenes in, and dropping in new titles.
Okay.
Okay. Can you
He would change it. He
elaborate?
was just trying to. He was always like trying to like see what's going on and see if he can. The one time he changed it was when Jim Jones, the guy Jim Jones.
Right.
It was like
Uh-huh.
that was an opportunity to try to reboot that and change the title to kind of fit like a Jim Jones. Did Jim Jones view the world's greatest sinner?
Uh-huh.
Rock God, the fanatical cult of TWGS.
Uh-huh.
He was just always playing with it because it never really was distributed, so it was always an undistributed film.
Uh-huh.
So
So
is
he
the
picked,
version that's out now, is it
yeah,
pretty much like it was in 1962, 63, or is it
and
was it changed?
it's a shorter version of the. It's got some of his stuff in it. There's a long version of the film, and there's a really long version of the film, like a 3 hour version.
Oh my.
Oh.
It's like the uncut version,
Mm-hmm.
and then
Now I'm
and then
curious
there's
about everything that was cut.
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
Well, I I have a lot of the outtakes
Uh-huh.
from Sinner. Right now they've got all the prints, and they've got all the basically all the film that survived. A lot of it got kind of just wasted by time, but there's lots of elements still around. That's all the outtakes from the film.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Like 100,000 feet of it, which I would say half of it was still salvageable, and that it's at the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. They're restoring it.
Oh, that's
Okay.
great.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah, it's supposed to be Scorsese and George Lucas. It's like the film foundation.
Mm-hmm.
These guys that restore films that they think are part of cultural heritage.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a space at the Academy called the Romeo Carey collection.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's got a couple of my films there too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the
And what-
funny thing is,
Uh-huh.
the archivists. There's two archivists. One I met in Washington. It was Olympia,
Okay.
Washington. He was the programmer at the Olympia, Washington Film Festival, and they had a tribute to Timothy Carey.
Mm-hmm.
I forgot where the other guy was from. The other guy was from some other film festival. I'd gone to both of them, and now they're working for the Academy, and they were like dying to get their hands on it. They've been bugging me for years. I finally got it to them.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to sound moving into back into center again. As far as it just reminds me when you're talking about Washington State, I saw that one of the shooting locations for center was Vancouver, British Columbia. I was wondering what that was.
Yeah, no, it was never shot in Canada.
Okay, because on IMDb it gives on shooting location Vancouver, so I just couldn't imagine what it was.
That would have been fun,
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
but yeah, maybe in a parallel universe.
Universe, yeah.
Yeah.
Also, it says on IMDb, I've read on the other places that the estimated cost was like $100,000. On IMDb, it gives $250,000 as the estimated, and I was just wondering about the difference there. What was the estimate?
Yeah, it was like back then. It was probably closer to 250,000.
Okay, that's what's going on. All right.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, even if it was 100,000,
Mm-hmm.
burgers cost 5 cents back then.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
A lot of money.
Yeah,
But you couldn't do those kinds of things. You couldn't rent stuff. You couldn't process film. It was a very exclusive, um, especially if you're trying to do a 35 millimeter motion picture film with
Hmm.
with with and just try to get it finished.
Hmm.
Took a lot of money, and a lot of money came from uh, a film that he helped make somebody really rich with, which was Mike Rips, who did Poor White Trash.
right.
Hmm.
Okay.
Poor White Trash went on
Mm-hmm.
to make millions. Like it outgrossed Ben-Hur when it was playing against Ben-Hur,
I had
Hmm.
no idea.
and he had made money. Yeah, it was the greatest, most successful exploitation film ever. He was supposed to make it on the cover. All the photo shoot, the
Mm-hmm.
whole story was already written, and it was supposed to come out in just a couple weeks. Mike Rips was going to be on the cover, and of Time as the greatest independent filmmaker in going up against Hollywood in Alabama,
That's amazing. I
Hmm.
hadn't.
and
I had no
and then
idea.
and then Frank Sinatra's wife died or something,
Mm-hmm.
and she ended up on the cover. Yeah, but it starred my dad and Peter Gray. You saw Poor White Trash.
I've seen portions of it actually. I
We
have
saw the
not. I
clips
have
and
not seen the whole thing.
we saw the bits that your dad appeared in.
Yeah, well, anyway, they were in it, he wanted to he helped bankroll part of Sinner
Oh,
because he
okay.
also owned a chain of theaters, and he figured he can put it in his theaters.
Uh
Hmm.
huh. And did he, or
It,
was that something that didn't
nah, never
materialize?
it didn't materialize. He actually ended up managing my dad for a while.
Uh
He
huh.
had him under contract for a couple of years because back then it was like the thing to do if you were into making money, manage actors.
So, Aaron, what else did you have?
Oh, well, it's on the top of my head. I was wondering, with how your dad was so closely associated with like these early rock, blues, R&B kind of things, what did his friends in that sort of circuit think of for World's Greatest Sinner when it came out? Uh,
Zappa didn't like it.
hmm.
Zappa. Well, I think Zappa did like it.
I was
The
about
problem
to
was
ask because it sounded like okay. I was kind of confused by that. I was wondering from what was said after happened this what happened on the Steve Allen show. It sounded like Zappa may have actually liked it. I couldn't tell from
nah. If you
no.
watch it, what it is he was laughing at it
Uh
like it was
huh.
a joke
Mm.
because critics had panned it,
Mm-hmm.
and he just went along kind of with what he was. It was like embarrassing that he did a soundtrack for it, but of course at the same time he was really proud that he worked,
Mm-hmm.
this 55-piece orchestra and the instruments that he had,
Yeah.
but he wanted to make sure that he got the point across that uh, the movie was a joke, and that Timothy Carey and a cast of 1,000 people he found on Main Street somewhere,
Well, what was he
and
doing on the Steve Allen show anyway?
he was promoting an album that he did,
Uh huh.
and he got on playing the bicycle.
Hmm.
Right.
But see, what it was Zappa had spent a lot of time with my dad,
Uh huh.
and my dad knew his dad. They became friends, and his mom would
Okay.
come over the house. They were like buddies. And the one thing with Zappa was Zappa wanted to upstage his mentor.
Mm.
He wanted his method was destroy the mentor and I get to take over.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
If I could just like slam him enough to discredit him, then I could run away with like what I got out of it, and
Mm-hmm.
I disconnect from him.
It just seemed curious to me that you had the two things so close together, where you had the film that was coming out, and then Zappa's out, and then the record that was coming out. So he ends up on the Steve Allen show, and he first talks about your dad's film, and then he
Right.
finishes up talking about the album. And I was just, yeah. So I did not know if he was originally supposed to go on there to talk about the film or the album or what. So, or it was a combination of things.
Well,
Yeah.
what they would do on the Steve Allen show, they'd have little
Mm-hmm.
gimmicks before the show would
Right.
start.
Uh-huh.
And he called up and said I could play bicycles
Oh,
with.
he called up that. Okay.
Yeah, he
He
called the
called
producers.
them. All right.
Yeah,
Okay.
he got himself on.
Okay, I didn't
Okay.
know that. I thought that he had been invited on, perhaps. All right.
Nah, they didn't even know who he was
Okay.
because they asked you what he goes, what do you do as that's what sparked the conversation.
Uh-huh.
What do you do? He says you probably sell insurance. You thought it'd be a good idea to get on the Steve Allen show playing bicycles, and here you are. And he says, well, what do you do? And he's like, I'm a composer. Oh, might we have heard of anything that you've composed? And then he says, well, I just did the score for the the he starts laughing. He couldn't even say it, for the World's Greatest Sinner. The World's Greatest Sinner? He goes, yeah, it's a Timothy Carey production, an independent production. He says, where'd you shoot it? He says, shot it in El Monte. He says, shot my agent in El Monte. Because El Monte was
Yeah.
like a rough place. It was the end of the Santa Fe Trail. It's where they came over, the pioneers.
But Tim,
It was like a
yeah.
saloon town.
But your dad's going to have been. I mean, they would have known your dad's acting. He was such a great actor, and so they would have
Oh, they
known
knew.
who he was, and that must have been such a punch in the gut for Zappa then to have said that.
Well, yeah.
I
My
don't know.
dad said he needed to apologize,
Uh huh.
Mm-hmm.
but he wouldn't apologize.
Okay. Because at first,
Wouldn't
I felt like it could have gone either way when I was listening to it. I was wondering, is it at first if that was something that was actually harmful, that would have been a real punch in the gut, or was it intended actually to kind of help promote the film? Like, oh, this is, but
Like
no,
I think my dad took it personal, but
yeah,
there's no such thing as bad advertising.
yeah,
And still, look how much it helped it. We're
yeah,
still talking about it.
exactly. Everybody's still talking about it, and
Mm-hmm.
it's on YouTube, and yeah,
Yeah.
mm-hmm,
So I mean, they helped each other, even
mm-hmm,
though. But no, the underlying story is that if you know particular personalities
mm-hmm,
have to like destroy whoever they're kind of, someone that they're looking up to or someone that they want to outdo. I don't know.
yeah,
It's like a contest,
uh-huh.
and that's where he broke away. Sometimes you got to destroy the lion to become the lion.
And so that was it for them. They didn't retain a relationship
No, that was
afterwards.
it.
Yeah,
Even though they worked on Head together, they didn't have a scene
that
together, but
okay.
they were on the set together.
All right.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, they were both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that happens. Yeah.
He met my dad on the set of some movie, and he had just come in because he knew like one of the production people who were like a stagehand or something doing something, and he was a neighbor, and he came in and he wanted to meet actors,
Mm-hmm.
so he walked up to my dad and started talking to my dad. And my dad said, "Hey, well, I'm making a movie," and he says, "Yeah." He says, "Well, I play guitar," and he goes, "Okay, well, maybe I can have you do some work on it." He gave him my dad. My dad gave him his number, and then he called my dad and came over, played the guitar for him, and told me he wants to do the score for his movie. And he says, "Well, if you get the orchestra, if you can put the orchestra together, I'll give you the job."
That's a big orchestra, actually. They were in the high
Yeah,
school state where?
they were at Chaffee Community College.
Okay, Chavy
They were
Community
at a college.
College. Okay.
Yeah, and they had the score, they had the movie,
Uh-huh.
so they were projecting it. They were playing to a projected image I have all the original tracks, everything.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you
Uh-huh.
can hear the recordings going on. You
Uh-huh.
hear Zappa calling 1, 2, 3 and giving some direction.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of stuff going on.
Uh-huh.
You intend to ever like put out like a CD or something like that?
I'd like to.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to. I mean, the idea is the score is it's what's in the movie.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's on my mind also. The soundtrack that was composed for it orchestrally had sort of like a kind of Schoenberg-ish neoclassical kind of feel. Was that something that Zappa brought in, or did your dad suggest that element of the soundtrack?
Yeah, that was all Zappa.
Okay.
The Gustav Holst stuff, that was my dad.
Okay.
Okay.
There was another band in there too, Bud Hill,
Mm-hmm.
Bud Shank Hill, something like that. There's like a blues band did some of the music in it too. It wasn't all Zappa.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to remember what part that was. I mean, I should remember. We are so steeped in it. We sat.
We
watched.
rewatched it like several times just this week, like preparing some of the questions actually.
No, true. Yeah,
Yeah,
and discussing every single
Yeah.
every single second of it. That's all the time we have for part 1. In part 2, we will further explore the cinema of Timothy Carey, including The Insect Trainer, as well as Romeo Carey's The Devil's Gas, and what Romeo currently has in the works. Thank you for listening.
This microphone is making a funny face at me.